questions, because it shouldn't be us trying to talk to you. This should be very interactive and discussive. So over to you, really. But we'll have a quick overview.
Yeah, so a quick overview. Most of you probably read this now because it's been up for a long time, but Andy's going to come on after me again, do a quick introduction of some of the main physiological concepts and philosophies around endurance running. It kind of falls off a bit of what Andy's going to talk about later on today, so you will touch briefly on it, but if you've got burning questions and you need it to complete the jigsaw, then ask away and put your hand up. I'm then going to talk about some of the physiology services that we provide out of Loughborough in particular, and the sort of broad range of services that looks like. So just to give you a flavour of what physiology actually does, most people just consider a physiologist to be putting people on treadmills and measuring lactate and maximal tests and so on. So just to give you a broader view as well of some of the other things that we do actually do. We are then going to put on a practical example of one of the test reports that we would provide, which is our bread and butter sort of VO2 max type test, just so you can get a flavour of some of the progression that happens to an athlete as they have multiple tests that links into some of the key determinants that Andy's going to talk about. So some of the things that we expect to change, and then maybe hopefully you guys can come in and ask questions around that, particularly around the interpretation of what that might actually mean for progression through the training programme. Next example, I'm not sure how many of you are exposed to some of the altitude programme that we have going. We can do as much or as little as you want. We've presented on this quite a bit recently. But that gives you some of the sort of, I guess, some of the theory into practice of altitude training, some of the sort of the way that we use altitude. It might be a bit different from a range of other countries here actually, so it'll be interesting to see what you guys do. And then if we've got time, we'll go on and maybe talk about maybe some future directions that Andy and I might have some ideas about, some of the things that we think could progress endurance and physiology in the future, and then we'll finish off with some questions and discussions. So we have actually quite a lot of time for today. We probably won't fill the whole lot, but you never know. So the main thing, as Andy says, put your hand up, ask questions, feel comfortable in this environment to do that. There's no silly questions. Alright, so first bit, Andy's going to talk through a brief outline of physiology basically, just to set the scene.
Yeah, I thought we'd start at the beginning by just really going back to basics, because we weren't really sure the level of expertise and experience that would be in the room. So basically, I wanted to tell you what sports physiology is all about, and essentially what we're interested in is the study of the human body and how it responds and adjusts acutely to exercise. But if you do exercise on a regular basis, if you train on a regular basis, what are the longer term or more chronic adaptations that occur? So that's what we're interested in, that's what our expertise is about, and we do research experiments and we read articles and we upskill ourselves on the body's acute and chronic responses to exercise. So as endurance coaches, it may well be that there's some information, some knowledge that we have that can help you to prescribe training programs to help your athletes benefit to the greatest extent. We're interested in how energy is provided. Muscles contract because they consume energy, but in order for the muscles to continue to contract, we must continually resynthesize that energy. So we're interested in those mechanisms. Some are anaerobic mechanisms, some are aerobic mechanisms, as you know. We're interested in what causes fatigue, and fatigue in endurance events can differ quite substantially from the 800 metres, we count that as an endurance event, right up to the marathon and beyond. So physiologists again are interested in what is the central or peripheral origin of muscle fatigue. What is it that causes us to slow down? If we know those limitations, then it may be that we can do things in training, or we may be able to do things on a nutritional or pharmacological or other basis, which enables us to reduce the extent of the fatigue and therefore improve our performance. So we may be able to touch on some of that. We're interested in why some people are better at sports than others. So what is it that makes Seb Coe capable of running 141 when I only did 157 or something like that? Lots of reasons actually, but that's what we're interested in. And how can people get better at certain sports or certain events if we're talking about endurance? For example, through training, what are the best things that we can do, maybe in training or by other means, in order to enable them to improve? And that can be at any age, of course, and of course we're interested in how we make that transition from being a promising junior to being a world-class senior athlete. So what do sports physiologists do if they're interested in those things? We study the physiological factors that influence sports performance, and I'll come up towards the end of my first brief stint here to show you a model of the physiological determinants of endurance performance. And in my talk later this afternoon, I'll go through why those things are important, how we go about measuring them, and how the information that we get from measuring them can be used by coaches to translate that information into changing training practice and ultimately improving their performance. So we don't just do tests, but we sometimes do tests. So we design laboratory or field-based exercise tests which allow us to measure those factors which are pertinent to performance. So we try to break down a person's performance into its physiological constituents. Okay? And then that may be totally physiological, to do with the energy pathways, to do with fatigue mechanisms. It may also be to do with body composition, flexibility, strength, and so forth. Because every individual will have a certain combination of those things that we all know to be important, and it may be a case of just trying to work out what are the particular strengths and weaknesses in an athlete, which we can measure on the basis of the test that we design, provided that they're valid and reliable and sensitive, and that can help us to hopefully help you to help your athletes. So we are able to advise athletes and their coaches on the training that can be done to improve those factors. So it's very important that we don't just stay in the laboratory and make our measurements and send you away with a bunch of numbers. And certainly later in this workshop, we're going to talk a little bit about why those numbers are useful to you, how you can translate them into something practical that you can take away and use actually in the field to help athletes improve. But and unless you want the physiologist just to give you the numbers, that's fine, because you know how to interpret it, that's no problem. But if they just send you away with the numbers and you don't understand those numbers or what relevance they are, then I think that physiologist has failed. And we monitor the effectiveness of training. I think this is quite an important thing. You know, athletes and coaches know when an athlete's running reasonably well, but some of it's guesswork because the field conditions change. You get rain on one track night, you get wind on another, and you can't be absolutely sure how fit an athlete is, and you can't be absolutely sure what's changed about the athlete's physiology, which has made them better. So how is it that your training is impacted upon that athlete's physiology? That's going to be crucial to know. So we're always looking at the relative strengths and weaknesses of an athlete, how the training that you've prescribed for those athletes has impacted upon those strengths and weaknesses, because something that was a weakness 2 years ago may now be a strength and vice versa. So we always need to be monitoring the training that's being given to the athlete in order that it's optimal.
Andy, can I kick off with a question? On your third point there, advising athletes and coaches on the training that can be done to improve whatever the results in the lab say. Now, in an English kind of a way, or English speaking kind of a way, do you mean there that you would say to an athlete, for example, I think that athlete would benefit from more mileage, or I think that athlete would benefit doing more speed endurance, so I think a typical session of 6 200s or 8 400s, is that what you mean by exactly saying a session specifically?
We probably wouldn't be that specific, but it would depend upon how the relationship was set up in the first place.
Right.
If you wanted that kind of information, we could certainly get into that kind of discussion.
Right.
But what's really important is that we're not coaches. We don't want to be coaches.
Right.
Right. You're very welcome to be coaches.
Right,
It's not
right.
something that interests us. But I think we do have knowledge, you know, within our field, which may be of use to you. So it could be that we see a physiological profile, and maybe the person's running economy is the thing that's a bit weak relative to, say, the VO2 max, and I'll come on to this. And there are certain types of training that you might want to make sure you're covering in order that you build up that particular aspect.
Right, okay.
It might be that you're already doing that type of training, in which case we could get involved in a more detailed discussion about, you know, why isn't the training that you're doing working, and are there certain tweaks that could be made. It would be rare that we would make very specific recommendations. We'd give you some broad guidelines, and then it's up to you to take that information away and apply it to your athlete, because you know them and we don't. Is that?
Yeah.
And as Barry mentioned, we can provide information on other things that can affect performance. So it's not just about training and physiology. We generally know a bit about altitude training and nutrition and recovery strategies and ergogenic aids like beetroot juice. and so forth.